third way the problem of evil can be used is as an external problem, suggesting that the existence of evil outright disproves God's existence, and it's formulated in a deductive system. The argument is not arguing that there is a logical inconsistency in the nature of God, nor is it arguing that God's existence is improbable. Rather, this argument is voicing the non-existence of God in light of the existence of evil. Or bluntly, evil is evidence against God's existence, thus it's the evidential form, I've titled it. It can be formulated logically as follows. Premise 1. If God exists, gratuitous evil does not exist. Premise 2, gratuitous evil exists. Conclusion, therefore God does not exist. So what is the Christian theist to do with this deductive formulation? First, the most obvious contention that can be raised is with premise 2, gratuitous evil exists. The Christian is committed to the truth that evil exists, but not that gratuitous evil exists. Now, as a Christian, I would admit that some of the events in this world appear to be pointless and unnecessary. However, I would challenge the inference from appearance of gratuitous evil to the reality of gratuitous evil. I've already given my rationale as to why I believe this. For example, God has morally sufficient reasons for allowing evil in the world. Our finite and limited view of events around us, void of the overwhelming view of history, etc., etc. Second, in asking whether evil is gratuitous or not, ironically, the most important fact we can consider is the existence of God. Thus, the necessity of considering all evidence is key here. For the theist could reverse the logical formulation from if P, then not Q, Q, therefore not P, to P, if P, then not Q, P, therefore not Q. The laws of logic allow us to do this, and this is not affirming the consequent. Thus, the argument goes like this. If God exists, gratuitous evil does not exist. God exists, therefore gratuitous evil does not exist. Thus, what happens and follows from premise 1 and 4, if God exists, gratuitous evil does not exist, is dependent on whether premise 2, gratuitous evil exists, or premise 5, God exists, has the greater warrant. Personally, I find that premise 5, God exists, has greater warrant due to such reasons, but not limited to the cosmological argument, the design argument, the moral argument, the ontological argument, and the consistency of the God hypothesis, the historicity of the resurrection and the biblical accounts, the existence of miracles and religious experience, to name a few. Thus, the justification for the existence of God seems to dissipate the notion that evil disproves God's existence. Moreover, premise 1 and 4 does not appear to be obviously true due to several reasons listed in previous videos, for example, human free will and the allowance of evil for greater good. Third, if you remember from my first video, I stated that the problem of evil raises the question of ethics. I've already discussed the problem with relativist ethics, so I will turn my attention to objective ethics. Asserting that there is such a thing as evil implicitly assumes there is such a thing as good, and further that we can differentiate between the two. Thus, the theist could argue this way. Premise 7, if God does not exist, then objective moral values would not exist. Premise 8, evil exists. Premise 9, therefore objective moral values exist. Premise 10, in conclusion, therefore God exists. This argument is a modified version of the moral argument, as you probably can see, for the existence of God. So for justification for premise 7, which is if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist, you would need to look at my videos on the moral argument for God's existence. However, one obvious question is how can random and personal chance allow for moral law? Moreover, how is sociobiological evolution, who has a main tenet of survival of the fittest, allowed to call things evil? How do we distinguish between what is an act of nature, example, a hurricane that displaces thousands and kills hundreds more, or the death of an infant with a weak heart? How can we call these things evil? Thus, the notion that God can exist with the reality of evil is both self-contradictory, in my opinion, and depends on the answer of the existence of God rather than the existence of evil for the above reasons I listed. A final point to consider and wrestle with is whether a world without evil would bring about the deepest and most holistic sense of happiness and worth than a world of forced automata. Moreover, would love be love if it was forced? This would almost seem to remove both good and evil from the world, simultaneously leaving us with neutrality.